I did not watch the last meeting, so
Yeah,
I don't know what
because I didn't upload it.
Oh, that explains it. That and I didn't have time.
Yeah, it was quite informal and overview-ish. Yeah, we thought about, okay, why don't we have a list that captures what we agree on and what are the the topics that we still need to talk about that are on the
We
horizon.
tried that list before. I remember we must have a small document, and the main problem there was always vocabulary, which is why I at that point started introducing this glossary, because if you put stuff on a list, if you don't agree on what the list means, then you still don't get
I mean, it were usually things that we heavily talked about, so we know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I think we coalesced a bit on some of the verbiage, so we could put that in the agreed on. But it's funny because we disagreed on what we agreed on, so that was...
And there was also this suggestion, like, why don't we map it out in an argument mapping tool? Okay,
because we don't have good tools. I mean, I've been dog feeding quite a bit, and the problem simply is I don't know any tool that's good enough right now to do that. I mean, you can do it and you will quickly uncover shortcomings of current tools, but that doesn't really help you resolve the discussions we are having.
Exactly. So yesterday I had a one-on-one session with Marc-Antoine, and because I thought about, okay, why not create like the simplest possible generalized hypergraph UI without any schema attached, and so you at least can express everything you want. Yeah,
I think the tool Timothy has been using for that has been fairly useful, and I think we need to do more
diagramming.
Yeah, exactly.
But he was against it because he said, yeah, it doesn't capture the structure in a database. Like, you cannot reference other stuff, and it's just a graphic.
No, but yeah, it is. It's an act of communication at this point. It doesn't need to be the actual data structure, right?
Yeah.
It's more of a communication tool.
I agree. I think it's the best we have right now.
And I think you can get the node connection data in there, even though it's not formatted exactly correctly. I think it allows you to get at that.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I think if you
actually
label
my problem with that tool is it's not good for text. It's not, so like capturing definitions, for example. It's just it's good for quick visualizations of an argument map, but I don't see it being good for any other kind of description. I don't know.
Yeah, like Steven said, we'll hit the limits pretty quick.
But I remember one conflict in understanding that we uncovered 2 meetings ago between Marc-Antoine and I wanted to hear your opinion on that, Timothy. What you have been thinking? It's related to the definition of a base layer and layer 2. I've always, whenever I said that, been referring to architectural layers, meaning 2 separate systems almost that run in a distributed fashion and talk to each other through some interface. And apparently Marc-Antoine revealed that for him it can just as well be a layer of interpretation, and the way I understand it, it's nothing more than polymorphism, meaning that the second layer being the extending objects of extra fields you can interpret in a layer 2, which of course for me defeats the purpose. I then said, for me that's just one base layer that supports polymorphism basically. Sure, you can consider it a second conceptual layer, and you can decide to not look at those specialized types and only at the abstract type. That's polymorphism. But I've always been talking about distributed systems, like a base layer being a separate system that can be hosted, and then other systems talking to the base layer over the network and appending their own data to those data structures and modifying the base layer the way they see fit. What was your understanding of this, Tim?
My understanding was it didn't really matter much at this point. You know, the question is, you know, what is the minimum set of structures and attributes that need to be captured to be useful everywhere, right? Like what's the minimum in a base layer that would need to be there so that a layer 2 could do the things it wants to do? And I don't actually see that being an architectural issue of whether it's distributed or in the same database or whatever. Yeah, so I just hadn't answered that question yet.
Okay, then it sounds like a more in line with Mark Antoine's thinking that you're only thinking about feature set. And yeah, I think my point was a bit different, and that the point of my base layer is exactly that you have one system that stores everything you can agree on that any other technologies can build upon using their own database, using their own serializer, using their own whatever they want to do, and they simply talk to that backend, which is for me how you can centralize this agreement across different technologies that basically all talk to the same base layer, which is an entirely different goal than only. Well, no, it's not. It overlaps slightly, but it might explain why I'm so insistent on not adding these specialized fields within that central system.
I mean, at some point, the considerations, the concerns are quality of service concerns, right? And at that point, you need to be talking about an architecture, because while you could ideally strive for having it be a totally separate system, you know, if every layer 2, if everyone only implements layer 2s, and every layer 2 has to go to talk to some external centralized system for the base data and then pull in, you know, some federated layer 2 data, it's just not a workable solution.
Why not?
Performance.
I don't see the performance issue, because your base layer can be distributed and be scalable. I mean, I don't see the issue. If anything, I would argue having all the specializations in one base system and everyone needs to talk to that is more of a bottleneck, because you can't scale different layer 2s independently from the base layer.
You need to I mean, you either need to, for performance, everybody have a local copy, right? Or you're doing a distributed save on every single update, right? You're saying, okay, notify that system that the base information is there. Notify everyone that there's this new base layer thing, and then notify them that I'm adding on this extra data on top for the layer 2 stuff. That's the only thing they really care about. And it adds complexity that nobody's getting any benefit from, right? Yeah, I mean, there's just way too many concerns right now to make that the thing we want to focus on and define, is how I'd put it.
Yeah, I see. It's interesting, because I see the exact opposite way.
How does the difference between those things actually affect what we're doing? Are you saying
the API, the base layer of the API will change drastically whether or not it supports layer 2 concepts?
Well,
from an architectural base layer perspective, right? If you want to host something and you want to support any layer 2, it's going to drastically impact the API. Yeah, you need some polymorphism. You need the base layer needs to be able to serialize any specialized types that the base layer architecture system is unaware about. So you need some common format. Mark Antoine last time suggested a simple string. That's one thing. But then what if your layer 2 wants full videos? Are you going to encapsulate that whole video in the string? And the base layer just going to say, yeah, sure, I'll encode binary data as strings and etc. etc. That's a complexity that, and you centralize scalability of any layer 2 to the base layer. Like, suppose that there's like one super popular layer 2, hopefully the canonical one, the one that has the best arguments, and there's some individual people that want to do their own fancy thing. You can't scale these two systems independently anymore, because they all tie to the.
I guess I'm still stuck on that. Our actual like deliverable is a over the line format, and I think you could in parallel design a format where you have loose references between two objects, and you could have one to where the assumption is the objects exist in it, and then defer this decision to later, because I mean, I just think that that's not that difficult of a thing to think about, unless it's actually affecting. So I could see, yeah, I mean, maybe even if they're transmitted in the same file format and stuff, maybe not having the data exist inside the objects. And I don't know if Marc-Antoine would be concerned with that. I mean, it's kind of,
That seems to be the main point that we were talking about 2 meetings
Yeah.
ago.
I guess that is, yeah.
And
So
if
yeah, I mean, I'd rather find a compromise and just say, well, it's less than ideal for your format, Marc-Antoine, but if you can, just kind of accept this separation in the file format, then that supports both models.
well, it means you need to contact two endpoints, right? You're implementing layer 2, so yeah, you need to talk to the base layer and you need to talk to your own database,
No,
which appends data to the base layer. But that's how.
I mean, you can
works.
simply have an API that says return me both layers or return me one.
Yeah, but then again,
It
you're
could be
presuming
fine.
that you store layer 2 in. I'm talking about architectural layers.
No, I'm saying
I want
that
one
I'm
API
saying that we could decide later on whether we want to include those other things.
and where they are hosted. Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
By hosting them together or hosting them apart.
Yeah. True.
So
Yeah, it's a good question. Like how do these decisions affect our modeling decisions?
yeah, and I really,
Really,
I
yeah.
mean, my main concern is the model, and I know that impacts these other decisions. But I think if we can find a compromise that can handle both those decisions in the model, and then just focus on the model, we can defer those discussions. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, yeah, I guess I was kind of like Tim. I hadn't even really thought about the impact yet.
It's
I
also
always
related.
assumed it was two systems, though, I think.
Yeah, me too. And my point is there should be two systems and it's two separate bounded contexts to come back to the whole DDD discussions. They serve different use cases. The base layer that I describe is all about centralizing disagreements, about linking relevant claims to one another, whereas other layer 2s, primarily the canonical one, is about curating and agreeing on what the best arguments are in one canonical way. Like you have arguments people say many different ways, and you're going to curate and decide on which one is the best one towards any given conclusion. That's a different goal than a base layer which merely wants to link disparate sources from any source on the internet in terms of claims that are represented in the sources to one another in terms of how relevant they are. They're separate goals, which for me is reason enough to implement it as a separate system.
But a separate system, to me, it sounds like they're conceptually the same if I put them in the same system or not. Like it's still the same separation of layers that you can have in one system.
How you deploy them? Yeah, okay. My point is, if you model it separately, it's a bit what Bentley said. If you model them separately, it doesn't matter how you deploy it, right? You can host both APIs interfaces on one server and access both. You can even provide a wrapper that provides the wrapper that Marc-Antoine wants, where you have the specializations. I mean, you can do whatever. My point is that the base layer that I'm interested in, I don't want that more specialized API because it's going to add stuff I don't want to conform to.
Which is
I
fine.
only want the base layer. I mean, I do want to conform to it later, maybe, but then it's also going to pollute the layer 2 API because it has to somehow. I mean, you're basically compromising two APIs because they're two separate ones and you want to merge them. I'm saying they're actually two separate APIs. Why not keep them separate?
I'm not saying I want to merge them. I'm just saying it's an implementation detail, and the layer separation thing is an abstraction question. Like, where do we draw the line in the separation, and how we implement that is a different question. And we don't need to answer that right now, I think.
Yeah, so if I'm thinking about how I'd want to interface this, I think I would like to have the option to where I could say, just give me layer 1 and not make me have to filter the data on my side.
Or if it's a protocol, I just implement layer 1. That's it, right?
Well, it's
whatever it is.
I'm saying
but what if you want just layer 1 and also you want Tim's layer 2 and Marc-Antoine, part of Marc-Antoine's layer 2? That's what's going to happen.
But
right, but
what would that mean? It fully depends on what those layers support, right?
That's still an additional feature to the fact of saying, or are you just saying that there's no real distinction between?
It's kind of like saying, what if we just did it? Yeah. What if we made our base layer just claims, right? Because we just want to collect truth statements. And then we build a layer 2 that adds arguments. Okay. So layer 2 is arguments. And then layer 3 is the curation. Let's build those in 3 separate systems. So now when you want to display an argument, you go to the base layer and you pull in the claims, and then you go into the argument layer and you pull out all the arguments and map those together. And then you go into the other system that's holding on the curation activity, and you put your presentation together after you've got the results from the 3 things.
But then every layer needs its own curation, right?
Exactly. You don't just host a curation thing that everyone agrees on. I mean, maybe I think we're talking about verticals and horizontals here. What you're describing are more like within a system, a separation. What I'm talking is like separate systems altogether you can separate, which each might have these layers or not. Because you will also need curation on the claim level to remove duplicates, for example.
And I guess to go back on what I was saying and kind of reverse position, if you're using, well, maybe we shouldn't assume this, but if you're using kind of the modern graph DB, is it Facebook made it anyways, to where you can say what fields you want, then you can customize the request. Although that's a very specific technology, GraphQL. Yeah, that's a specific technology though. It'd be nice to have hard thing. But I mean, I think having a system with endpoints that produce different data will be something that we want to do. And I don't know, maybe we shouldn't call it the base layer and just call it which I think Steven's already started going towards, is calling it, giving it just a specific name. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not helping that much. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we should figure out, like, we should go back to the model, talk about that, because things we decide right now that make sense to us might change when the model changes.
And then the question is, indeed, yeah, that's another reason for separating it, is you want to separate what is likely to change and keep in a separate system what is unlikely to change. If we can now agree on a full system, we can deploy.
That's not what he's talking about changing. He's talking about, because our base model keeps changing. So you wouldn't want to create a system and then define your claims one way and and then everybody agree that the claim is just not quite modeled right and have to build a system on top that corrects that, right? So he's talking about fundamental model structure that might change.
Yeah.
I would just say my main concern with the base layer versus layer 2 thing.
What do you mean by versus? That there should be a layer 2? That I don't get the context. That
the things I want in layer 2 should not be in the base layer. My main concern is probably with the immutability. I disagree pretty strongly about your notion of keeping everything immutable, especially when you acknowledge that there needs to be curation. And
I think immutable is an implementation detail. Again,
it's a fundamental part of Steven's concept, of the base layer.
That's a fruitful thing to talk about right now.
Except that I think it's an empirical question. I don't think we're going to be able to philosophize on it. We have to kind of prove one way or another that either it's going to provide a break or it's going to lead to a break between layer 2 and base layer.
So you feel like you have a clear enough understanding of Steven's what he means by immutability? Because it sounds like Felix and I may not.
I can
guess so.
clarify the main reason for immutability, because again, my base layer is about centralizing claims so that if anyone refers to one claim, we can tie in all resources related to the claim, including arguments, including all the relevant claims in whatever specialization form. If you don't have immutable claims, if somebody writes a blog post, they link to a claim they created in the base system, which exactly you want to do in order to link all other blog posts that make the same claim to that same, you want to centralize that. If you don't have immutability, you break that connection.
Okay,
That's
so
the main conceptual
is
reason.
it right to say that once an ID is given to a string or a claim, the data in that, I mean, that's what immutability means, but sometimes it's a transient immutability, but this is permanent immutability. So if you want to change that whole debate or argument, you actually have to swap out the IDs that you're pointing to, as opposed to changing the
Yeah,
text.
for example, if you correct a typo and it has a different ID, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, so I have I think that there are different reasons you're linking to a claim. And this is why I see immutability through the lens of transparent history as opposed to everything there. Because, for example, sometimes you want to point to a link to a claim or a debate as it was at a moment in time. And sometimes you want to see how it's going right now. Probably usually you want to see how it's going right now, because if you're having a Twitter spat with somebody, you want to say, oh yeah, here's that. You don't want to try to be underhanded and say, yeah, well, back when the debate first started and only my friends got in on the debate, we were winning, and here, go see. But other times you want to show specifically that at that moment in time the debate looked like that. There's another question in there which is separate, which is cleaning up, that I think is important. And so, I wouldn't want to link to the completely messy version of the debate that
How would you possibly support history if you're erasing history? If you're not erasing history,
you're not erasing it.
You want immutability.
Yeah, I think
because you can link to the moment in time.
Yeah,
you link to the moment in time. What
And
curation happens at a moment in time.
All you're saying is you can add edits to a claim, but all
a curation happens at a moment in time. And so, but the point is, I want to be able to link to the claim at the current state after somebody's gone through and cleaned it up,
like a commit or a branch.
Yeah, cleaned up.
If you want.
Not a branch, because
but to a specific part. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more useful to, when it's been cleaned up in the past, you leave it in the past. You don't make new arguments on something that's been cleaned up, right? It's like look at the simple case of a duplicate claim, right? At some point, you find that two claims are duplicate, you decide to merge them, right? And then somebody goes and finds the old duplicate sitting around, and they keep making arguments over on the old duplicate. Well, you've got a problem unless your architecture is built in that, all versions are pulling into one place the view of the arguments, which is a separate approach for that solution. But a lot of curation actions, I think, should cut off the debate at that point and move it over to another place where it's going to be more readable and more productive.
I'm not disagreeing.
Yes, it's an assertion that, yeah.
But to do that, you need immutability. You
well,
cannot link
but I
old
mean
to new stuff if you don't have immutable old claims.
No, but I do want historical immutability. I don't want anybody to remove permanently anything. I want a slider so you can go back in time and see what it looked like. And I want people to be able to audit curations.
Yeah, try, Felix.
Yeah, so the requirement is I want to be able to link to something back in time exactly how it was then, right? Or the ability, as Timothy said, the ability to link to the current state or the improved state.
Well,
this is a requirement which doesn't require an immutable implementation. That's just what I'm saying. It's probably, yes, of course, it makes sense to implement it immutable, but you also can implement a mutable system where you can still link back in time and have a history.
the question is, do you still have the option of linking to what's the current example of this, not a point in time? So Stephen,
Well,
is that a feature
in
you want to
Gruff,
allow?
yes. In Gruff,
Right,
you could
but
do that.
The question
yes.
is, Stephen, does Stephen want to allow that?
I didn't quite get what you were.
So if I want to have the ability to reference a claim in an argument, and that if someone changes that claim, my reference points to the updated claim, not to the historical one.
It should point to both. It should primarily point to the historical one, because the person
So-
writing that article intended that claim to be added. You cannot, on behalf of everyone that ever linked to the claim, presume that they meant the improved one. What you can do, of course, is say, well, there's a better claim available of this argument if you actually follow the link and say, well, there's more relevant discussions related to these updated claims or duplicate claims, etc. But one of the main reasons I always want to link to the original one is because the author, the contributor that maybe that added the claim, added that claim and not another one.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways to implement that.
Yeah,
But
so-
that's a good point, that when you're pointing to it, it should know what history you're pointing to, and then you can choose to go forward through history if you want to.
Yeah, and that's a UI question. And it's also a base layer question that you need to be able to model in a base layer improved versions of claims. That's duplicates, improvements, etc. We've talked about that.
So the points of contention I still see are, number one, I don't want to allow adding new arguments or forking a past version of a claim. That is, in Gruff, I did these things we're talking about. So I basically there's an identifier for the claim, and there's a separate identifier for the claim version, shall we say. And so there were start and end dates on those, and also on links to things. So, an argument points to the shared ID for that claim. But actually in the graph, you have a link to an old version, and when you create a new version, you put a timestamp that ends the link to the old version and create a new link to the new version. So yeah, it's going in versions. But what I don't want is somebody to take that claim that has been versioned, so there's a new version of it, and fork it. So you have the same claim twice represented at the same point in time. And I don't want, at the one in this earlier point in time that's been closed off, frozen in time, does somebody make a new reference to it from an argument, from a support or whatever.
Just linear histories for claims, basically.
Yeah, as if there were version numbers, essentially.
Yeah.
So, the debate is happening on the latest version. Even the curation is happening on the latest version, not on older versions.
But yeah, so you assume you agree on curation on what a better new version is, and you assume that everyone linking to older versions agrees with that. That's the tricky thing. So if you do it like that on a base layer, you need agreement on that, on the curation mechanism on the base layer.
Right. So in the simplified version, which is the way I implemented it, yes, there's conceptually a version that doesn't require that, but I haven't run through all the implications of it in terms of data. In other words, you sort of create forks if you have two different versions of curation. And you could do something where, each person votes on which version of the curation they like. And like blockchain or something like Bitcoin, you only see the one that you voted for, right? But it creates bifurcation that can get weird. You can have debates around the curation. So you can do the curation through debating, but if there's no cutoff point, which is kind of the principle of canonical debate is not to have those cutoff points, then you get something I find hard to visualize and can't expect users to understand and visualize. So I don't want to require curators to make a decision and that's it. but I don't want to deal with the alternative.
So Marc-Antoine wants to do the opposite, right? He wants to say people can fork and then merge again and so on.
Yeah, so but there's a lot of questions he hasn't gone into about that. Like, what does it mean that a user merges into it? What if somebody doesn't agree with the merger? Do you have debates on the merge, on the pull request or whatever? Is there a master branch? No, he wants all branches, but is that going to be manageable and still canonical? That's, to me, even
practicality,
more complex.
Good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Eventually canonical. Like eventually consistent.
No, if it were eventually canonical, but you don't have,
Well,
again, it's not like, you don't have, like Bitcoin, you have a mechanism for selecting a branch, right? To choose the official.
Well, I think, right, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
In other words, you have a mechanism for defining literally what they call the source of truth, right?
What are claim improvements for you? What do you understand by that?
I can give a simple example. Like, you quote a claim from the internet and you made a typo. Or like,
there's different levels.
Word or something, and then it's a different claim or whatever. But
yeah, there's different. I tried to document the different types of curation or alterations that I could see happening on a claim. Deduping is one. Moving an argument is another one. Moving an argument. No, that's well, a support is a claim, so yes. I guess so.
Yeah, but so you're saying, in other words, you're saying you can remove one and add it again. So it's not, because moving an argument is nothing more than removing the support in one place and adding another new support. So you're saying that you should be allowed to remove supports, basically. That's the immutable part you disagree with. The deduping, I agree with.
Well, no, because it would be historical. In historical terms, it would be immutable. You could go back in time and see it there at the other place. But in the new view, it's pointed somewhere else.
Okay, why do you move it? What's the reason for moving it?
It's a non sequitur, and there's another place where it is the sequitur, right? It does make sense.
Okay, non sequiturs, I would agree on a base here. I would consider at least flagging as deleted or curated away. I would still make it immutable so you can see, well, this was removed. But in that sense, I agree.
Splitting a claim is another one, which you would do at the base layer pre-acceptance curation, right? That's where you would do that. Is they put in a run-on sentence and said this and that and that and that. No, could you break that up? But if you do a base layer where you don't have that centralized filter, or the centralized filter screws up, right? It's the wrong fat fingers it, and that claim's now in the system. It would be better to break it up. But part of one of my objectives is to kind of teach proper argumentation and to teach how the system's supposed to work, which means in the case of the fat fingering, if it's immutable, somebody accidentally let in a horrible claim, it's going to serve as an example to somebody that, oh, that's okay.
Depending whether or not you mark it as deleted or removed. I mean,
well, then you need to mark it. That's a curation.
Take again the Stack Exchange example. They're there and the owners can still see it, but it's no longer visible to external people or people that don't have the access rights to see deleted stuff.
Right, but then you're kind of leaving it permanent, but doing the curation on an internal thing, or you're revealing it through historical view, which is kind of what I'm talking about anyway. But those are the kind of things that are curation. A more advanced form of moving in curation is like a multi-step. Like I would treat it as, what is it instead of, I'm forgetting my processor terms, I'm blanking on this. The language, complex versus simple operations. Like if you think about moving, well, what is the simplest thing? Changing a title, changing some text, if you allow changing text, would be a very simple atomic operation. Moving is kind of a two-step operation that you want to do atomically, because you're removing it from one and adding it to another. There's a much more advanced curation thing that could be done as several smaller operations, either done separately or done atomically. But I call it regrouping, which is a combination of creating a new claim, creating a new support, and then moving a bunch of related supports underneath that grouped argument. So the common example I give for that is studies. This study shows that, this study shows that, this study shows that.
That's a
and you
different
create,
use
these
case, right?
studies show that, and you pull it down. It's a different, it's a more
This
advanced
has more to
form
do
of
with the
curation.
layer 2 canonicality. What is the best way to group all these claims?
I
this
probably agree with that. Yes.
This is why I highlight on the base layer. I don't want to
Kind
remove
of,
those because
you are creating, because you are creating a new claim and a new support when
Yeah.
you do that.
Well,
and it's something
yeah,
you want to see at the base layer.
Yeah, of course. But I'm saying on the base layer, I wouldn't move them. I would add them on both sides because they are also relevant at that other level. And other people might structure it like that. The fact that you want to group all studies in one maybe claim to better structure and give the best overview of the argument is a layer 2 concern. The base layer should aggregate all different representations like that. That's why I'm saying a move operation like that is not a non sequitur. It's different. You're moving it to because you feel it's a better structure.
I agree. And what I'm trying to think about is how this meshes with the, I don't want the debate to happen here, I want it to happen there now situation. Which is, say you've regrouped a bunch of studies, and then somebody comes to the base layer and sees the bunch of studies still pointed at directly at the thing instead of the grouping. They might, perpetuate the problem by constantly adding the new studies at the top level instead of the lower. It could still happen on a layer 2, even with the restructuring, people can still do that. It's just less probable, shall we say.
I think it depends. And again, on a base layer level, it doesn't matter because it's just about linking people to the relevant places. If you have a mechanism in place in the base layer that shows that this one particular grouping is very popular and there's not a lot of disagreement on it, then it would still also be visible on that base layer. And then you might see that there's less agreement on these individual studies and people would still be directed to the more suitable high level groupings. But the common use case you're saying here, I mean, ideally we do succeed in the canonical layer 2 and they would be there. The only reason people would go to the base layer is because they're somewhere on a blog post or whatever. And then from there, you might be able to link them to the most canonical layer 2 argument. So the base layer is designed as a link between different layer 2s. It's not the place to go to navigate.
Right, and I both I reject the multiple layer 2s statement and hesitatingly accept it at the same time, which is I don't want people saying different debates. I don't want people missing information. On the other hand, I acknowledge there's a problem that I don't think I can solve with my approach, which is, well, different, like you said, different people will want to see it in a different way, like the society library political perspective versus like the Tim society science view or something. I don't know.
By the way, didn't get the former point because the whole point of the base layer is that people don't miss information. All the relevant, the whole purpose of the base layer is to link all the relevant information and how popular it is. So they won't miss information. Except that it does be very messy.
Yeah. They miss it
one thing Exactly. It's information overload rather than underload, right?
And that becomes a thing of what do we want to support on a base layer, and that's why I always highlight showing popularity and disagreement, and like all the things that people agree on where there's no controversy, they shouldn't be highlighted. They're there, but people are interested in disagreements in the most popular argument of layer 2, etc. That's of course the things where we need to build in mechanisms in the base layer that can be supported, that you can quickly from the base layer redirect people to the most useful resource to discuss it in a more meaningful way.
That means you want to have like kind of a voting system in the base layer to show that.
Yeah, so for me, a base layer does need a notion of being able to express belief with any given claim. That's how I calculate popularity. And then the other metric I described a couple of times before is simply like bias, like how many claims were added for in contrast to against. Like if there's only pro claims being added for one particular claim, it means the discussion is fairly biased. There's also stuff to say counter that claim, and that's another metric you can show.
Well, but that's not a metric you store. That's inherent in the structure.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
But capturing what people believe is scoring to me. It's a different type of scoring, but still scoring, which means like if other scoring mechanisms don't belong in the base layer, probably that one doesn't either.
Well, I would argue it's a fairly essential scoring mechanism in the base layer to make the easy filtering work in the first place.
No, but it's essential to you and your view that you want.
To enable the use case of what I see as separate bounded context for the base layer, it is fairly essential, yes. Otherwise, indeed, it's going to be.
Yeah, but why is your use case the base layer and not also a layer 2?
Well, it's both, but my primary, because layer 2 builds on top of a base layer. Because the only reason you can connect multiple different layer 2s and finally start resolving disagreements on different ways of modeling arguments for me is building base layer 2. That's why that's my primary use case. The dependency doesn't point the other way around. I don't see a base layer building on top of a layer 2.
Maybe the layers are just in your system then?
Right. I'm just not sure why capturing people's beliefs is a base layer thing. I don't see it. You're saying a use case, what you want to show. That sounds to me like a layer 2 view.
Well, let me clarify, because the concern of the base layer is to centralize this agreement. How can you visualize this agreement if you have no clue whether or not?
Yeah, but you're talking about visualizing. You're not talking about
given claim.
You're talking about visualizing. You're talking about capturing data, and your definition of disagreement is a scoring mechanism you've come up with, as opposed to the count of arguments on the other side, which is inherent to the structure or what I'd consider the base layer.
It's both.
I think you're defining a scoring mechanism you want to see as fundamental to the base layer, and I don't know.
So I'm arguing there needs to be a scoring mechanism of agreement on the base layer, because the whole purpose of the base layer is to visualize this claim. Is this a controversial claim or not? Let's put it this way. One of my primary use cases of a base layer is, as a user, I want to see whether or not a claim is controversial. That's a use case I want to support in that system, without caring how that claim participates in any other arguments or how it's modeled.
Okay, but I also want to see how my beliefs differ or contradict one another. Why is that not in the base layer?
That depends on whether or not determining whether or not they contradict each other requires assuming a certain way of modeling the argument, I guess. So it depends where you're going next with this.
Well, I kind of where I'm going is that I think you're conflating use cases in kind of a structural form of disagreement as opposed to a popular opinion form of disagreement. And like, for example, I would recapture that information in a separate scoring mechanism on my layer 2. I wouldn't use your scoring mechanism. So that we're talking about something you want in the base layer that doesn't apply to my use cases.
I understand this, but In other words, you don't believe there's a use for a base layer. You just want one layer 2 that works and people agree with.
No,
Okay.
no. I'm saying if there's a base layer, it has to, or it should contain the things that don't vary from system to system, right?
Yeah.
Definition. Yeah.
True. And
Yeah.
I am saying that people, regardless of layer 2, do express whether or not they believe in a certain claim. Yes. That's why another reason I want to put it in the base
Well,
layer, because I don't
but
see that
Stephen,
differing across layers.
Yeah,
Isn't
but
that
how
expression in your
they
case still
express that,
binary?
yeah.
Okay,
How they express it depends on which system you're looking at.
Let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Yes, I might agree. We can make the base layer smaller, that you can plug in different scoring mechanisms, and then we can have multiple different deployed base layers depending on what scoring mechanism you want to use, but it's still a base layer. And you can definitely make the base layer smaller and make the whole scoring thing modular. But
How is modular not a layer on top of the base?
because it's a vertical. The base layer I'm talking about is a vertical. It's a system. It's a base. That's why we really need to give it a different name. I need to try to find an analogy that works. It's like basically Twitter. You have APIs to access Twitter, and you can like add additional things, additional metadata to Twitter, and then you build other systems that use tweets and visualize them in different ways, maybe in popularity graphs and all that stuff. They all point to the Twitter API endpoints. That's the base layer I'm talking about for claims.
But Twitter was built for a specific use case, right? It wasn't
the
built
base layer I'm
to,
arguing for.
Right, but so but here's the thing. It kind of becomes Socrates as the base layer, and then everybody else builds on the data from that. There's things
Well,
in
it's not
Socrates
Socrates the UI, it's Socrates the data structure, yeah, or the most common data structure we can all agree on. Yes, and Socrates would be one visualization of the base layer.
Right, but I don't agree on your metric.
Which metric?
The score.
The score, the measure of disagreement, right?
And what is it about it that you don't disagree with? What's the problem, or why don't you think that it should be in a base layer?
Because I want that to be a pluggable scoring mechanism.
So you say that there will be different layer 2s that want to express different ways of agreeing on claims on a base layer?
Well, I don't know. I'm just, all I'm saying is if scoring is a layer 2 thing, your feature is a scoring feature and it should be on the layer 2. Like, there's no argument. I don't see a solid argument why my scoring algorithms are a layer 2 and yours is a layer 1, except that you're kind of mixing the term of disagreement.
I think the main difference, which we've hinted at often, is one, I think, is more like calculating truth. And what I'm talking about is people expressing what they believe in. It's two separate things. I wouldn't call people expressing what they believe in scoring per se.
I mean, it's some way to help you visualize what's important and whatnot, and so on. And I think that this area of putting numbers into the system is what Timothy calls scoring, right?
Yeah, but it's
right. Essentially, my scoring mechanism is belief in percentages rather than absolutes.
Yeah. Okay. But then we're back to, because there's essential reasons why people don't work that way. People don't believe in a percentage. You can predict.
That's a user interface concern. That is a user interface concern. You're talking about what users are going to react to better. And I would say people don't want to read every argument that's been posted out there in multiple reorganizations all at once. They'd rather see something that's been cleaned up and curated, right?
I don't get
the usability thing.
What is the percentage?
No, I'm not saying, I'm not defending the percentage. I'm saying that, I was making an analogy, but we don't have to make that analogy. You are talking about what you think and have tested and have seen that users handle, or what's better for users, right? They prefer to express in ones and zeros, absolutes, rather than in percentages, right? And that's a usability question. You know, first of all, there are different types of users. So when you say users, you're kind of generalizing a little too much there, right? Because I know I want to be able to express it in percentages.
But what
I think
are
it might be interesting to do it in
expressing?
absolutes, but
My question remains: are you are you assessing whether or not you believe in the claim in a percentage, or are you assessing the likelihood for the claim to be true in a percentage? They're two separate things.
it's not belief, it's agreement. It's how much I agree with it.
You agree in percentage. So
Yes.
what does 75% agreement mean? How do you come to that percentage?
It means that
You're
I
not
think that's
100%
probably
sure.
right. Yeah, there's different ways. There's not 100% sure, or there's I have some reservations, right? Because in a classical dilemma, the definition of dilemma is two choices that are both bad, right? And so I want to say, you know, they're both bad, but I'm leaning towards this one as being the less bad option.
Okay, so that wouldn't be either belief or not belief. That would mean not expressing belief on a base layer. It would mean the it depends option, where you say, well, it depends on the specifics whether or not you believe in it.
Another example,
Well,
you could say, I agree with most of it.
What do you disagree with?
Well, no, let's talk about if somebody's lying, right? I don't always believe 100% somebody's telling the truth or 100% they're lying. I get a feeling I would stake 80% on their telling the truth.
Yeah, but
right?
you're assessing truth, not your belief. That's my point. There's a difference between assessing truth and belief.
I don't know what definition of belief you're working with. My understanding of your definition of belief is it's an all or nothing thing.
It is.
That's okay, but it doesn't. I don't believe anything, so I guess I'm zero everything.
Yeah, it is.
That's
it is
not
good
useful.
To be,
I find things to be highly complex, and I find it a fallacy to assume there's 100% or 0%.
It's not. You can also not express belief, but people in real life, they tend to believe, and those are the one of the base
then
rules.
It should be optional in the base layer.
But it is. You don't need to say you believe or don't believe in it. That it is.
It should, or rather, it should not be in the base layer. By the definition of how we're working with base layer, you are seeing one feature that you would like to see and you think is important.
Because it's a base premise of informal logic. It's acceptability. You need to start with claims that you agree on. You need to see in a community which are the claims that people agree on. It's what makes a base layer.
But now you're talking about agreement. You're not talking about belief. You're talking about agreement, which is what I said is a percentage thing, right?
Percentage, how? I fully agree that you can say 80% of the population believes with this, 20% does not. That's for me agreement.
Do you think you mean agreement more than belief? Because those are, in the way I think of those terms, those are very different. But you seem to be using them differently. And when you say agreement, I think it makes everything you're saying makes sense. When you say belief, I get confused.
Agreement I use when you talk about more people. If you have 5 people, let's say 10 people, 9 of them believe in a claim, 1 of them doesn't, then you have 90% agreement on that claim.
Yeah, for me, that's a nonsensical statement.
How so?
Because a belief is not, you can agree on a belief. Agreement is not a belief that is, yeah.
I think you're talking about like voting, right? Where you have 2 candidates and you're like, yeah, this one sucks that way and that one sucks another way. And so I would say, you know, I'm kind of leaning 70% towards that candidate.
Yeah.
When you go to vote, you're required to vote all or nothing. And would you call that a belief? I don't believe in that candidate. I'm just voting now for that one because I have to choose one.
Semantics aside, regardless of what you want to call it, in informal logic, it's called acceptability. And when you have a discussion, you're trying to resolve debates, what you do is you put claims forth, you ask, do you believe in that?
Acceptability.
And then you move on from claims that you all agree on. And if there's fundamental claims you're using in your argumentation you don't all agree on, then those are the central points of disagreement. And remember that the whole point of the base layer is to centralize disagreement and reveal controversial claims, etc.
Acceptability is a scoring mechanism. Acceptability, when you do AI, there's lots of different ways of deciding the acceptability of a certain claim or a certain, a certain conclusion. And it's usually mathematical based on complex algorithms and the structure of the thing. And so the acceptability score and whether or not it's accepted depends on the algorithm you're using.
Yeah, well, that's a different definition of acceptable than the one that I was referring to. I'm linking to the. I'm referring to the one in formal logic, where for an argument to work, you need to work with premises that are acceptable.
Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, the whole concept of I guess I strongly disagree with the fundamentals of informal logic. So maybe I'm not really good to do this. I think that's a dumb way to argue, even though it's been around for thousands of years.
Not thousands. I think informal logic is actually much more young than math and formal logic.
It being based on some of the, I mean, they mention.
We're at the hour. I have a hard stop, but they haven't called the meeting yet. So I have an unknown number of minutes.
But okay, but regardless, it's interesting to know that. But yeah, for the main reason I want to have some type of, if you want to call it scoring in the base layer, is because it's quite essential for the use cases I want to support in the base layer. I don't see the base
question
layer.
is why do you see that as the base layer? That's the question. Why do you consider that to be part of the base layer as opposed to something you should do in a layer 2?
Scoring, because the base layer is designed to point to the points where people disagree or agree on. If you don't have that as an expression in the base layer, how do you get that data?
I don't agree with that definition. I
understand it's different. From what I understand is that the base layer is what humans express. Nothing more, nothing less. Is that what you're saying, Steven?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that I don't think it's that, because humans may express a percentage or absolute belief. I don't think
and that by definition is super messy.
What is messy?
Yeah, because what humans express is super inaccurate and super.
Yeah, so the base layer needs to support something that's useful for the use case of the base layer.
Right. This is why my definition of the base layer is more empirical or more.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see everyone's definition. Who cares?
We've done this before, and I was kind of defining it to some degree as Steven's use case, just because I found them the most simple. But really, my definition is everything that is common to everybody's set of use cases, right? It's all the things we all want, right?
That's a weird definition, right? Because it's undefined, in other words. I mean, it's not defined in a functional case. It's only defined in a result of discussions case. It's only defined once we finish the discussions, whereas I'm pointing a clear use case for this is what I want to support in the base layer.
Okay, but I'm clearly saying I see that as a layer 2 thing. I would only want to support it in the context of a pluggable scoring mechanism.
And again, we can make the base layer component based where the scoring mechanism is pluggable, but then you simply have multiple instances of base layers that are not compatible, which is also an option.
Or it's just that designed in the base layer is the pluggability, the interface, and then every layer 2 defines its pluggable scoring modules.
Yeah,
right.
You put different protocols on top.
That works, but that means you don't have scoring in the base layer. So if you can, what do you visualize if you have a UI for the base layer? You can't visualize.
You build a layer 2 that uses the base layer isn't a view.
A system, yeah. So exactly. So you're saying
it's a database.
Yeah. So you're saying the base layer is not something user facing. I'm saying this, and it should be. That's the use case. It has use case. That's front facing.
And there seriously disagree. If,
So you-
if we're going there, then I would fight for my layer 2 ideas being in the base layer and that being the
Exactly.
system of
So
record.
you're arguing that there's only one layer. So you don't see the merit of the base layer I'm talking about.
No, all I'm saying is that if we're going to have a second layer, which might have merit, I want what's in the first layer to match. That's not, yeah. I didn't express.
I
that
gotta
well.
go. 'Cause
But
my
anyways, we
meeting's been
can,
called,
yeah,
so
we can
we'll have to
discuss this.
continue
But if
this,
anyone
yeah.
wants to, it might be good to phrase once again what you think's in the base layer.
I
Maybe
think
not.
I should
I don't
list
know.
a set of use cases that I want to support. And then, well,
I'd
essentially I
find
already
that
have them.
helpful, yeah.
but
And I think
I
we
will
should
do that.
advance modeling discussions and then we go back to this. Because I don't think we come to a conclusion right now with this one.
Well, the
Think so,
conclusion
yeah.
is we
Right.
disagree.
Yes. It's an experiment. Failed
Yeah.
experiment.
See you next time.
But with progress.
Tuesday, right?
Tuesday, exactly.
Cool. See you.
Okay, have a great weekend.
Bye.
You
Bye.
too.